There's a photograph that sits in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It's from 1941. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt are standing on the deck of a warship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, smiling for the cameras. They look like old friends, allies bound by shared values and common purpose. The special relationship, they called it. But if you rewind the clock just 126 years earlier to 1814, British soldiers were marching through the streets of Washington, setting fire to the White House, the Capitol, and every government building they could find. The president's mansion burned so fiercely that the flames could be seen for miles. America's founding documents were nearly lost. The young republic was on the brink of collapse. So here's the question that haunts the history books. How did two nations who fought 3 separate wars against each other, who viewed each other with suspicion and contempt, who competed for global dominance, become the closest military and political alliance in modern history? When exactly did Britain and America stop being enemies? The answer isn't a date, it's a process. A century-long evolution, driven not by sudden friendship, but by cold calculation, shared threats, and the slow realization that their rivalry was destroying them both while empowering their true adversaries. To understand when the enmity ended, we have to first understand why it began. The American Revolution wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a civil war within the British world. The colonists who rebelled in 1776 were British subjects. They spoke English. They followed British common law, they read British literature, but they had developed a separate identity, forged in the wilderness of a new continent. When they declared independence, the British elite saw it as an act of betrayal, a treasonous uprising led by smugglers and radicals who refused to pay their fair share for the empire that protected them. The war that followed was brutal. It lasted 8 years. British forces burned towns, hanged rebels, and fought to restore royal authority. But they lost. And that loss created a wound in the British psyche that festered for generations. The Americans had proven that Britain was not invincible. They had shattered the myth of imperial permanence. Worse, they had set a dangerous example. If the colonies in America could break free, why not Canada? Why not the Caribbean? Why not India? The independence of the United States was seen in London not as the birth of a sister nation, but as the beginning of Britain's decline. The First War ended in 1783, but the hatred didn't. Britain refused to evacuate its forts along the American frontier. They armed Native American tribes to attack American settlers. They kidnapped American sailors off merchant ships and pressed them into service in the Royal Navy. They blockaded American trade with France. The British establishment believed that the American experiment would fail, that the Republic would collapse into anarchy or dictatorship, and the colonies would come crawling back to the crown. But America didn't collapse. It grew. And that growth triggered the Second War. In 1812, the United States declared war on Britain. The stated cause was British interference with American shipping. But the deeper reason was expansion. American warhawks wanted to conquer Canada and drive the British out of North America permanently. They believed it would be easy. Britain was distracted, fighting Napoleon in Europe. Surely a weak divided empire couldn't defend a frozen wilderness thousands of miles from London. They were wrong. The war was a disaster for both sides. The Americans invaded Canada and were repulsed. The British burned Washington in retaliation. At the Battle of New Orleans, American forces under Andrew Jackson slaughtered a British army in a battle that took place 2 weeks after the peace treaty had already been signed. Thousands died for nothing. When the war ended in 1815, neither side had won. The borders remained unchanged, but the psychological damage was profound. Americans saw the British as tyrants who refused to accept their independence. The British saw the Americans as dangerous, expansionist upstarts who couldn't be trusted. For the next 3 decades, the two nations avoided open war but competed ruthlessly. The competition played out across Latin America, where Britain tried to maintain its commercial dominance while the United States, emboldened by the Monroe Doctrine, declared the entire Western Hemisphere off-limits to European colonization. It played out in the Pacific, where both nations raced to claim territories and established trading routes to Asia. And it played out in the borderlands of North America, where disputes over Oregon, Maine, and the boundaries of Canada nearly triggered a third war on multiple occasions. In the 1830s, a rebellion in Canada almost pulled both nations into conflict. American sympathizers crossed the border to help Canadian rebels fight British rule. British forces retaliated by burning an American ship and killing American citizens. Newspapers on both sides screamed for war. Militias mobilized. Diplomats worked frantically to prevent disaster. War was avoided, barely, but the hatred remained. In Britain, the American stereotype was a crude, violent, slave-holding hypocrite who talked about liberty while slaughtering indigenous peoples and expanding like a cancer across a stolen continent. In America, the British stereotype was an arrogant, imperialist tyrant who sneered at democracy and sought to undermine American prosperity at every turn. But something began to shift in the 1840s and 50s, not because of love, but because of economics. Trade between Britain and America was exploding. British factories needed American cotton. American railroads needed British steel and capital. Slowly, the two economies became intertwined. War would mean financial catastrophe. The merchant classes lobbied for peace. They cared about profits, not old grievances. Then came the American Civil War. Now this was the first real test of whether the old enmity could be buried. The British government faced a choice. The Confederacy was offering cheap cotton and trade deals. The Union was blockading southern ports and threatening British shipping. Many in the British aristocracy sympathized with the South. They saw the Confederacy as a more civilized agrarian society, similar to the British landed gentry. They despised the industrial democratic North. There was serious talk in London of recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation and breaking the Union blockade by force. If Britain had intervened, the United States would have been destroyed. The Confederacy would have won. North America would have been split into two hostile powers. And Britain would have gained a grateful ally in the South, but Britain didn't intervene. Why? Because the British working class wouldn't allow it. In the industrial cities of Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool, textile workers were suffering. The Union blockade had cut off the supply of cotton. Mills were closing, families were starving. But when Confederate agents toured Britain trying to drum up support, they were met with protests. The British working class understood what the American Civil War was really about. It was about slavery. And despite their own suffering, they refused to support a slave-holding rebellion. Mass meetings were held, petitions were signed. Workers declared that they would rather starve than see Britain ally with slaveholders. It was a remarkable moment. The British government, swayed by public opinion and wary of the political cost, stayed neutral. The Union won. And for the first time, a large segment of the British population had sided with America against their own economic interests. It was the first crack in the wall of enmity, the first sign that something deeper than hatred was possible. Still, the suspicion remained. After the Civil War, Britain had built warships for the Confederacy that attacked Union vessels. Americans demanded compensation. The dispute nearly triggered another war. It was resolved in 1872 through international arbitration, when Britain agreed to pay $15.5 million in damages. It was a humiliating climb down, but it was also something else. It was the first time the two nations resolved a major dispute through law rather than force. Diplomacy was replacing violence. By the 1890s, the world was changing. New powers were rising. Germany was industrializing at a ferocious pace, building a navy to challenge British supremacy. Japan was emerging as a military force in Asia. Russia was expanding, and Britain was overstretched. The empire was vast, but it was also vulnerable. Britain could no longer afford to treat the United States as an enemy. They needed America, if not as a friend, then at least as a neutral party. A new generation of British strategists began to rethink the relationship. They looked at the map and realized something unsettling. If Britain went to war with Germany or Russia, and America sided with the enemy, the empire would be doomed. British shipping lanes across the Atlantic could be cut. Canada could be invaded. The industrial might of the United States could tip the balance of any great power conflict. So Britain made a choice. In the 1890s, British foreign policy shifted. Quietly, carefully, they began to court the United States. They stopped opposing American expansion in the Caribbean and the Pacific. When America went to war with Spain in 1898, Britain was the only major European power that didn't condemn it. In fact, they quietly supported it. When disputes arose over the borders of Alaska and Venezuela, Britain backed down. They gave the Americans what they wanted. It wasn't generosity, it was strategy. Britain was sacrificing its pride to secure its survival. The old enmity was being discarded because it had become a luxury Britain could no longer afford. But the Americans didn't rush to embrace Britain. American leaders remembered the wars and burnings. Teddy Roosevelt, who became president in 1901, built up the American Navy to ensure America could defend itself and project power globally. The United States was becoming a great power, and great powers didn't need permission from London. Then came World War I. When war broke out in 1914, the United States stayed neutral. Wilson declared America had no stake in a European war. But American banks lent billions to Britain and France. American factories supplied the Allies. If Germany won, those loans would never be repaid. Then Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking American ships. They also sent a secret telegram to Mexico, proposing a military alliance against the United States. When intercepted, American outrage exploded. Wilson asked Congress for war. America entered the war on the side of Britain and France. But the relationship was complicated. American forces fought as a separate army. Wilson distrusted British imperialism. When the war ended, Wilson's vision was betrayed. The Treaty of Versailles carved up empires and imposed crushing reparations on Germany. Disgusted, Wilson returned home. The Senate refused to ratify the treaty. America retreated into isolationism. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, America and Britain drifted apart. When Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, the United States stayed out. But then came Churchill's letter in 1940, written as London Burned. Churchill told Roosevelt that if Britain fell, America would stand alone against Nazi Europe. Roosevelt understood. Lend-Lease was approved. American factories became the arsenal of democracy. And then Pearl Harbor. Japan attacked. Germany declared war. America was in. American and British forces fought side by side. Their intelligence agencies cooperated. Churchill and Roosevelt met, repeatedly forming a bond that became the foundation of the alliance. But even in the midst of war, tensions remained. The Americans still distrusted British imperialism. Roosevelt pushed Churchill to grant independence to India. He opposed the continuation of European empires after the war. Churchill resisted, famously declaring that he had not become the king's first minister to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. The Americans were helping Britain survive, but they were also positioning themselves to inherit Britain's role as the dominant global power. The war ended in 1945. Germany was defeated, Japan surrendered. But the world had changed. Britain was bankrupt, indebted, exhausted. The United States was the richest, most powerful nation on earth. The Soviet Union, a wartime ally, was now an adversary. The Cold War was beginning. And in that new reality, Britain and America finally became true allies. Not because they loved each other, but because they needed each other. Britain needed American money and protection. America needed British experience and global reach. Together, they formed NATO. They built a network of alliances to contain Soviet expansion. They shared intelligence through the Five Eyes Agreement. They integrated their military planning and nuclear strategies. The special relationship became real. It was formalized in treaties, institutionalized in organizations, and embedded in the DNA of Western foreign policy. So, when did Britain and America stop being enemies? There's no single date, but if you had to mark a turning point, it would be the period between 1895 and 1917. That's when Britain made the strategic decision to stop treating America as a rival and start courting them as a potential partner. That's when America, despite its suspicions, began to see its interests aligned with Britain's survival. World War I tested the partnership. World War II solidified it. The Cold War made it permanent. By the 1950s, the old enmity was dead. The wars of 1776, 1812, and the near wars of the 19th century had faded into history. A new generation had grown up seeing Britain and America as natural allies, united by language, law, and shared democratic values. But the truth is more cynical. The enmity didn't end because of shared values. It ended because both nations realized that their rivalry was weakening them, while their real enemies, Germany, Russia, and later the Soviet Union, were growing stronger. The alliance was born not from love, but from fear. Not from shared history, but from shared threats. Today, the special relationship is taken for granted. British prime ministers and American presidents speak of it in glowing terms. Intelligence is shared, military forces train together, diplomatic support is assumed, but beneath the surface, the old dynamics persist. Britain is the junior partner, dependent on American power. America is the dominant force, pursuing its interests with or without British approval. The relationship is special, but it's not equal. It never has been. The end of the enmity wasn't a reconciliation, it was a merger, a hostile takeover dressed up as a partnership. Britain traded its independence for security. America gained a loyal ally and a foothold in Europe. Both got what they needed. But only one got what it wanted. The story of when Britain and America stopped being enemies is the story of how empires decline and superpowers rise. It's the story of how nations, like people, set aside old hatreds when survival demands it. And it's a reminder that in international relations, there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends, only permanent interests. The next time you see a photo of a British Prime Minister and an American President standing together, smiling for the cameras, talking about the unbreakable bond between their nations, remember the fires of Washington in 1814. Remember the wars, the threats, the decades of suspicion and rivalry, and remember that the special relationship wasn't built on love. It was built on the ruins of the British Empire and the rise of American power. It's a partnership born from necessity, sustained by pragmatism, and held together by the knowledge that the alternative, rivalry, and division would destroy them both. That's when Britain and America stopped being enemies, not when they started liking each other, but when they realized they couldn't afford not to.